Want to make sure. Yeah, it does do the caption already. Okay, so let's talk about the project before we start the lab. And if you want to start working on the lab, you can download Kali Linux. That takes a few minutes. Well, that's what we're going to use today. So this project is going to entail your response to a request for proposal. Simply a request for proposal is just basically a pulse for companies to put in a bid. That would include solutions. That could be communications, contract for building, architecture. So RFP can go from one industry to the next. It doesn't have to be just for IT and cybersecurity. So for example, if you have an enterprise that is looking for local companies to give them some kind of solutions in software, they can put out an RFP, looking for valid solutions. So based on that, they are going to determine which one is going to be the best suited for that particular project, right? So you're going to see the document here for part 1. Let's preview that. So for this particular RFP, request for proposal, is being generated by New Era Healthcare. They are looking for a proposal for cybersecurity firms to provide comprehensive network security service for a medium-sized medical facility. The primary goal is to secure network infrastructure. That's the major core of this class. Safeguard sensitive data, patient data. We touch on that today, right? Ensuring compliance and regulatory also today, that such as HIPAA. So the background, right? This is a medium-sized healthcare organization using that supports critical applications, EHR, electronic health records, medical services, generally, we can just make a general assumption, and administrative functions. To ensure data integrity, confidentiality, and availability is paramount, given the sensitivity of the healthcare information. Infrastructure includes wired and wireless network, on-premises and cloud-based applications, and remote access capabilities for telemedicine. That's common now. Okay, so the focus on this is you are going to address the scope of work. Okay, selected vendor will provide a comprehensive suite of network security services that may include but not limited to the following. This is the base requirement. 1, network security assess audit. So in your project, you will not, so remember that this is a proposal that you submit to the company, right? You will need to tell them how you're going to perform network security assessment and audit. Okay. So they're looking for a company to conduct a baseline security assessment to identify vulnerabilities for the infrastructure, including network services, servers, workstations, and wireless access point. We've done, right, some hands-on exercise that deals with vulnerability assessment with web applications, with systems, and so on. So you need to, in your response, this area, you need to talk about how you are going to assess network security and audit it. Okay. Remember that assess is pre and audit is post, meaning that you assess the system first, right? And then you're going to come, or current state, right? And then you're going to come back, right? And audit to see, so you're going to check the system to see what it needs, what's the gap, okay? So we need to talk about how we're going to achieve this, right? You can talk about technical tools. You can talk about matrix. You can talk about how you are going to look at, you know, how you're going to identify the vulnerabilities from software, looking at CVEs, from the database and common knowledge resources, right? Go back and look at some of the concept that we have covered. That's going to help you fill in this area, okay? 2, firewall and intrusion prevention. So your IPS and your firewall here. Implement and configure firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention system, and web filtering tools and monitor control incoming and outgoing network traffic. So probably gonna focus mostly on, and you can talk about what kind of rules and what kind of firewall that you want to implement in your solutions. Like you can say, you know, like packet filtering firewall, stateful firewall. I think we touched on that before as well. So looking at how you are going to be able to prevent and filter network traffic ultimately. Okay. So talk about rules, about ports, about services, you know, these things. So address that. And where IPS should be integrated, right? All right, data encryption. Deploy encryption for data in transit and at rest. So that would be data in and out and stored, right? Ensuring protection of patient information and compliance requirement. I highly recommend looking at HIPAA requirement for encryption. There is a base requirement for HIPAA. And so you can't just implement any data encryption solution, right? You have to implement at least the base minimum of the requirement. Higher is okay, right? Remember what we talked about. Encryption is ideal in concept. You have to consider performance. So your encryption solution should yield performance and also protect. Okay, you know, so if you're talking about data in motion, that could be email, right? You can say using encrypted email system, but looking at solutions that is going to yield performance. So your users are not going to spend a lot of time waiting for encryption, you know, and then decrypt and so on. So think about that. Okay. Endpoint security. I think we have a chapter on that as well. Protection solution for connected devices, laptop, desktop, mobile devices, and advanced threat protection capabilities. So, you know, your simple endpoint solutions could entail, you know, checking malware to, you know, updates and so on. So we need to practice defense in depth for endpoints protection. And then network segmentations, that is, I think it touches on that in most chapters. Whether we want to use VLANs or some area or IP addresses and route or filter with firewall. That is up to you on how you want to segment. You can specify what kind of network segmentation that you want to implement. So for example, like for the area for the patient access or certain department or, you know, however you want to approach it, right? There's no right or wrong solution, right? There's only effective and ineffective solution. That's what I tell most people. Some solution works better than other. Some solution costs more than others. So, you know, are you way off? Yeah, there are times if you put in the wrong so for example, if I throw in something technologically doesn't make sense, yeah, that could be way off. But in IT and security, we're only looking at things like effective or ineffective, right? Things that slows things down completely is ineffective. So you have to consider availability as a major component for this type of organization. So that's good. Okay. And then we need to implement multi-factor authentications, and we can talk about if you want to implement, you know, different type of technologies can be used here. Or if, you know, there are different ways to approach MFA, right? And so with research and then with the knowledge that you know, and also some of the concept that's covered in the class, you're welcome to be flexible and innovative in this area. I really think that MFA can be a lot better than what it is now. But like I said, it needs to be responsive and it needs to be intuitive. Okay. Okay. And then incidents response and forensic, we need to look at on how we would handle incident response when it happens with our monitoring system, and then provide forensic capability. So, what kind of forensic will you be looking at, like for malware or for, certain type of threats and so on. So how can you have it rapidly detected? How can it be contained and how can it be remediated? Okay. So talk about, your type of threats and how that can be detected and then how it can be investigated in the case that if it happens. So, and then security monitoring and SIEM, this is going to be deploying and managing the security management system. So for monitoring, alert, and analysis. So maybe touch on how you can use this to monitor security events and activities on the systems and networks, and then how it would notify the people, the managing team, the security team, along with also the user in the case that if that happens to the user. And then how we would be able to analyze, so maybe log events and other things here, system logs and so on, right? Touch on that. And then compliance and regulatory alignment. We know that it is HIPAA requirement, and then we also need high-tech requirement. So look at the regulations and how it can be met. So you can point out what HIPAA requires. I know that there's a long list, right? Let's summarize it and keep it where it is understandable. You have to know that RFPs are sometimes being reviewed by business manager and executive. So we cannot be too technical. And if you are, make sure that you define the technical things, right? So making sure that it is going to be relevant to the healthcare regulations, and then have a solution for training and awareness. And keep in mind that when you look at scope of work, each bullet, I want you to think about timeline. Okay, things don't magically happen overnight because it's a project. So, but make sure that it's realistic. You cannot do this in a couple of months, right? Sometime that could span out throughout the year. So, and then it also depends on how big or small is your company. So if it consists of one person like myself, right? I cannot do 5 things at once. So I'm just gonna do one thing for how many weeks and months. And then while I'm doing that, I can have another overlapping things. So looking at the amount of effort that you put in for the project and the timeline for the project. Okay, so make it feasible. And so that's in the requirement, it states that. So your security awareness and training, and you're welcome to use online products that already existed. You can buy things out of the box and implement it, or you can customize it for the company. That's really up to you. Okay. So best practices in phishing prevention. So best practices is going to be like password and, that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. So the deliverables are here. What we talked about in the scope of work. So comprehensive network security assessment and report, prioritize recommendations, include timeline and project costs. Do your best in the cost. I don't expect you to have a comprehensive cost because this is an arbitrary company. You don't really have, for most RFP, they're not going to give you a lot about themselves. You have to research them, and this is a fictitious company, so you are going to not know too much about it. So you just do an estimated cost, right? But when you do an estimated cost, you still have a little bit of a breakdown in some category of your cost. Implementing recommendation and security measures and configurations, system hardening, deploying SIEM for 24/7, document incident response plan, user training, and monthly, quarterly report So this is the requirement from you as, let's say that if you win the bid, this is what they're looking for you to do. Don't forget about your charge. I think a lot of throughout my now almost 20 years of teaching in IT and cybersecurity, a lot of students submit the project like, oh, I want to upgrade this, I want to install this, I want to buy a bunch of NIPs and put it here and here and here. I want to, all of these software and things come in and they calculate the cost and then they forgot about how much they're going to charge, right? So quantify this out to the amount of hours that's going to be requiring from you as a consultant and how that is to the dollars, right? And don't undervalue yourself, right? So look at the industry and how much they would normally charge for this type of solution and then ballpark it, right? But you don't want to go too high because you will lose the bid. You don't want to go too low because they're going to question why you're undervaluing yourself. Okay. In your proposal, these are the things that are going to be looked at. Your background, so make a fictitious company for yourself, something .biz or whatever you want, right? And then put in the relevant certifications or your experience, right? And even if you're new in this, you can say how knowledgeable you are in cybersecurity, right? And the type of credential that you have. Your project team member, so if you're working with someone else, you can put that down in their title, okay? And their credential information, their qualifications. So this is basically people and company. And then the technical approaches, remember, going back to the scope of work, right? Detail methodology on the component from the scope of work. So each of the bullet element, put down your technical or your methodology, your solutions for that. Then your cost structure, a comprehensive breakdown of the cost. You're welcome to include a spreadsheet for this. I recommend using a spreadsheet so you can put in the formula to calculate that out. That's easy. So needs to be initial setup, assuming that they might not have an SIEN, right? So installation, hardware and software, ongoing monitoring, how much that's going to charge, your maintenance, okay? And then any additional fees. Do not forget to include tax and other things, right? It still is a service, so you still have to pay tax for your business. And so you will need to also include that. And then when you buy things, you got to pay tax, okay? And then you need to include 3 references that could be fictitious clients or, something like that. Put down some information or real. That's up to you. But at least 3. Okay. And then include compliance assurance information that's aligned with healthcare regulations. And then service level agreement. Look at a template of an SLA online and use that template. It doesn't have to be extremely long. SLA are generally pretty short. So service level agreement, you are going to put down including what you guarantee in response time. Like, so let's say that if something happens, an incident happens, how soon are you going to respond, right? How soon are you going to remediate and all those things. So, and so when you're handling issues, what is your resolution timeline? And that needs to go on, and then outside of that, how are you going to charge them additional fees, right? And it can't go on forever, right? I tell my students, make sure that in your SLA, you have to give it a restriction and timeline. Let's say that your contract is going to be, you guarantee your work for a year, and then subsequently, it's going to cost them money in the subsequent year. Or if it's like doing business hours and then outside of business hours, it varies. So you have to look at how that is effective. For a healthcare facility, it's likely it's 24/7. That's what they want, right? So what you want is you want to make sure that you providing supports and response need. right? Based on what you feel that would be adequate for your company and them, right? So you have to think about, what can I do and in comparison to also what they need. Um, so So when I evaluate, these are the things I'm going to look at from your document. And when you submit, you're welcome to submit multiple files. That's fine for this particular part of the project. If you want to include it all in one PDF document, which is normally what most business do, that's okay, right? So I'm going to look at your technical competency on how you respond to the RFP. Is it cost effective and realistic? That usually I look at realistic first, and is it cost effective? Because cheapest doesn't always mean the best. And then how clear you are with the structure. So when you give me the cost breakdown, right? In your explanation, you should also include like why it's used. Uh, uh, Demonstrated the understanding of compliance, quality and availability for security tools and solutions that kind of tie back to the technical area. And then your references for healthcare. This is not so much, but for us, it's this. In the real world, they're going to look at all of these, right? How experienced you are, how cost effective you are, how good you are, how knowledgeable you are. And that's what they look at. So deadline is going to be December 12th at midnight or 11:59, right? Submission format. So in most cases, like I said, it's PDF, but if you need to submit it in Word and Excel and other things, but if you should uniform everything in one document in the real world. That's what we do. And then if you have questions, right? Normally you would see that this is like CIO or somebody like some kind of chief executive director that's gonna respond in the case you have additional questions. So, and then this is what their timeline, this is their proposed timeline, right? This is what the company is looking for. So they released the RFP on November 15th. They want you to respond about a month later, which is December 12th. They're gonna go through the selection a week after, and then they're gonna implement it usually a month after, right? Now, that's usually private sector. The public sector will take months. So from this part to this part can be easily like 6 months or sometime 8 weeks. And then from this part to this part, it depends on the funding. Sometime that could be right away, sometime that could, but most public sector that could be 6 months, right? I dealt with one that takes up the whole year just to respond for RFP. But what you see is this is kind of give you a perspective of how you're going to be able to do this if you're going to be a consultant, at least the initial step, right? The implementing solutions, that's going to be once like you get that check, all of that can be spanned out, right? Like you would have a project manager, you would divide that up, you would hire some of the people to be able to support you. So with that, on your RFP, you would also, you would include the general thing like, the technical team, and in some cases, if you already hired the people, you would list them, because if a company that requires clearance and things like that, they're gonna want to know who's touching their machine. Okay, so sometimes you have to go through the clearance in the process. So, but for the confidentiality, there usually is a statement like this. Sometimes you have to sign an NDA upon agreeing for the bid. So here is additional information for your RFP, right? And then usually you would have an appendix where it talks about like some of the technical background. They don't have to give you this, but if they do, right? So they want to protect patient privacy. There's some backup solutions that they're looking for. So the servers, you're going to have the common server roles. You have the common client systems like PCs, and your endpoints, right? So authentication server, your network service servers, your remote access servers, so your RAS, your web for DMZ and some other areas, right? And then you have your storage server. It doesn't, I think that they mentioned earlier on, there's a cloud capability, and it's also in the diagram. So you would know that, so so you have to consider some of the cloud security aspect. So there's an internal DMZ, and the internal DMZ is mostly for some access with the patient data for checking in and out. And then, and then there's internal network. Okay. So using this, I already have some technical details. You can think about segmentation. There's already segmentation, right? But you have to think about how additional segmentation and improvement, and then also additional security improvement here. Okay, any question? It's not that bad, I promise.